Hello once again and welcome to Herd Immunity News. I'm Marquess. It is my great honour and delight to welcome back Mr. Godfrey Bloom back onto Herd Immunity News. Godfrey, as many of you will know, is a former MEP with UKIP. He's also a historian, he's a lecturer, he's an award-winning fund manager, but now he is a conspiracy theory analyst. To add to all his accolades, we could go on and on. We always leave the links to this great man's work. Please check them out. You'd be stupid not to. But without further ado, can I just say, Godfrey, how are you, sir?
I'm extremely well. Thank you very much. Since we last spoke, I've crossed the pond on the Queen Mary to promote my book. And it was been an ambition of mine for some time to do that crossing. I'm not a cruise person. It was a crossing on the last of the great liners, and I wanted to do that, and that was a great experience. And fell walking in the Lake District, so now I'm back at my desk, refreshed, ready for action.
Well, it's great to have you refreshed and ready for action because you're always required and you're always needed to bring your wisdom, your leadership, and your fortitude to us. Now, we're going to start off by asking you about heroes, political heroes. Now, we've heard it mentioned that Lord Salisbury, if I'm correct in saying, I see a smile coming to your face. Lord Salisbury is somebody who you greatly admire. Can you just tell us why you admire this man so much?
Well, surprising enough, counterintuitively, he is a libertarian. And you think when you see his great bushy beard in the 1890s, and you think an authoritarian conservative figure. But actually, you read his speeches, it's not quite like that. And he must be a dangerous libertarian. Otherwise, why would Cambridge University have banned me from actually giving a lecture on Lord Salisbury a couple of years ago? I always regard that as a great accolade if I'm banned by Cambridge or Oxford or anybody else, as I frequently am. Interesting, is it not, that his ideas are too difficult to deal with for the Cambridge undergraduate, a figure who was the Prime Minister, whatever, 120 years ago, over 120 years ago. What is it they're so frightened of? Now, on my website, I've done an article which is on Lord Salisbury. It's been up there for several years. And I leave it up. I never take anything off my website, so I can put my hand on my heart and say I've never been wrong, which is why nobody likes me. So I don't take stuff down for convenience. I haven't suggested with Tony Blair, for example, that we ought to have mandatory medication. So I don't have to hide anything on my website. But what I particularly like about Lord Salisbury is a number of quotes, and I'll just give you one or two. But if you visit that article on my website, I think you'll be delighted, or those on your channel and my channel will be delighted, because it's very much in line with our ethos. He believed, for example, it was in the days of temperance, and the temperance movement was extremely strong in the late 1800s, as you know. And one of his quotes is, "It is the right of every free-born Englishman to get as drunk as he likes. It's nobody's business but his own." Now, that's right up my libertarian street. And there's another one I rather like, which is very much more apposite today, I would argue, and that is, it is the responsibility of Parliament to release the entrepreneurial ability and of the English economy, if you will, or words to very much to that effect. It isn't Parliament's duty to make regulations every day in their hundreds and hundreds, which actually stymies economic growth. He said that's not our role. The role of Parliament is to let people get on with it in the entrepreneurial way, which the British, of course, are so good at, or used to be so good at. And that's why I like him. There's lots more stuff as well. One particular, especially in the light of the Royal Navy producing all these aircraft carriers, which are yesterday's weapons. Yesterday, they've been obsolete since Okinawa. And so what was rather interesting, he said, the trouble is with the Admiralty, and bear in mind he said this in round about 1890, he said the trouble with the Admiralty is that they dither and dither and dither, and eventually when they come to a final decision on what should be done, it's hopelessly out of date. And of course, that's our Admiralty today, and it's been the Admiralty since the days of Nelson, I'm afraid. So we now have things like aircraft carriers, which can't go any further east than Sicily because they could be knocked out by a bunch of spear-carrying characters in the Yemen, with some drones which cost 10 grand. So they are completely obsolete. Now what they do is they sail around the world on goodwill visits with no aeroplanes on. You couldn't invent all this, and they cost us billions. So the whole thing's bullshit from start to finish. But if you want a political hero, Lord Salisbury is your man.
Well, I agree 100%. And the articles and the research that you've done on them are fantastic. We recommend everybody go check them out. But I would love to see you make a documentary, Godfrey, out there where Lord Salisbury lived, even in Parliament. I don't know if that's possible or if I dare put that onto your schedule, but I would love to hear Godfrey Bloom do a tribute to Lord Salisbury. I don't know if that's possible, sir.
Well, I'll certainly think about it. I'd certainly love to do it. Yeah, it's the technical logistics of the whole thing, really, isn't it?
Yes. I'll leave that with you. I'll leave that with you.
It's a good thought.
Yeah, and your fantastic production team. Now, talking about heroes, that's just a segue onto Nigel Farage. Now, Nigel Farage, as you are a hero to many people, you are to us. You're a political hero, but we will leave that again to one side. We'll talk about that in a pub one evening, my round. But Nigel Farage has lit up this current election. It was dull, it was boring, it was Starmer, Sunak, the uni-party candidates, really like a baton handover. What's your analysis so far in the Nigel Farage resurrection and reforms fortunes in Britain?
Well, as you well know, up until quite recently, I was fairly hostile to reform because I thought it was fake. And under Tice, there's no question about it, it was fake. Almost in every regard. It was the Conservative Party policy trimmed up a little bit. It wasn't real. It certainly wasn't reform. It wasn't worthy of the name reform. But I'm delighted that Nigel's come into the fight, because if you leave aside foreign policy, on which I'm afraid, sad to say, he doesn't have the remotest clue. But if you look at domestic policy, he's spot on. And there was nobody else in the game who was actually flagging up, which of course is the greatest danger to us of all time, I would argue. And that's mass immigration, because that will kill our culture, that will already killing our institutions, on top of course, the Blair administration that David Starkey talked so eloquently about a few weeks ago, the desperate failure of the Blair government. So all these things have come together. And of course, that is a major problem that we have. It's a major problem. I think we have two major problems at the moment. That's mass immigration and potential world war with Russia. Those are the two things. Well, at least Nigel's picked up 50% of that. And of course, who could not be absolutely thrilled when he utterly destroyed Penny Mordaunt the other day, and the whole audience burst into laughter when he actually hammered her on 5 manifestos of reducing mass immigration, and failing on all 5. Why would we believe you again? And she hadn't got a sentence out before we all burst out laughing. It was hopeless. So his return to domestic politics must be extremely welcome. And for the first time ever, I've been trying to get, the reason I thought Tice was fake and reform was fake, because nobody was actually saying we tow the boats back. Now, Nigel, for long last, goodness me, it took a bit of time, at long last said we've got to tow the boats back, not rearrange the ECHR and all the other things, only, as the French would call it, action directe is going to work. We tow the buggers back, end of, no argument. In the same way we did it physically with Philip of Spain, Napoleon, the Kaiser, Hitler. That's the only way Johnny Foreigner understands these matters, is you tow them back. And that's the end of it. And if the French try and interfere, and I've said this, I think, on your channel before, I have no problem sinking French vessels, if need be. They've got to know that we're serious. And we've done it before, and we'll have to do it again. So good for him. I hope he's going to keep, and I hope he does well. And I hope he doesn't go native like Meloni of Italy, who talked a very good story in opposition and then fell to pieces as soon as she got in. But of course, he's not going to form a government. But it's looking like it's not impossible that he could form HM opposition. I think it's unlikely, but we're living in unlikely times. We're living in funny times. And if he could go to the dispatch box and hammer Starmer, who we know, of course, from Peter Hitchens and David Starkey, is a raging Marxist with a veneer of plausibility, if you will, with his knighthood and all the rest of it. Who dishes out these knighthoods to these people is quite beyond me, I suppose. Anyway, leaving that aside, I would like to see Nigel crucify him at the dispatch box. And when it comes to foreign policy, let's let old George Galloway have his say. And then I think these are the sort of people that can put the government, a Starmer government, on the rack. But it's looking, it's too tough to call. It's too close to call this election, really. I think it's going to be a Labour government, but with a much smaller majority than we might have imagined.
Yeah, that's a fantastic assessment. And as you correctly said, can you imagine, Nigel is the bookies' favourite, by the way, to win it in Clacton. He's 4-7 on, which were exactly the same odds that Galloway was given in Rochdale, and he romped to victory. In fact, he got more votes than all the rest combined.
That's right.
That was really on a single issue, an immediate action plan and he's smart to do that. He'd be a fool not to do it. He was talking about the war, the genocide, or whatever you want to call it, in Palestine. Nigel's focused on mass, unlimited, unfettered immigration. Again, Godfrey, you're 100% correct saying World War III is probably a bigger part, but the man on the Clapham omnibus, as you call him, he's not blooming interested in World War III. That's so far down the line. He's interested in who's living down the street from him, the crime rates, the impact that immigration has on our infrastructure in this country. But can you imagine? It'd be like going back in a time machine to your days when you watched Nigel and yourself, to be fair, sir. You would destroy and put to the sword Guy Verhofstadt, Herman van Rompuy, and these type of odious characters. You imagine Nigel and George Galloway on their feet in the House of Commons. Would it be like going back in a time machine and seeing Nigel in Brussels?
Yes, I very much hope it would be, and I think it's badly needed. The uni-party game that we've had for so long has got to be ended, but it's far more complicated. And I do commend anybody who hasn't seen David Starkey's lecture on the government of Tony Blair and the problems and the destruction of our legal systems and the principles of English law and so on and so forth. It's well worth the time. It's only about half an hour. There's questions afterwards. It's well worth it because he does focus on what needs to be done, and it's a very tall order. There needs to be a massive reappraisal of how we are governed. And at the moment, nobody's really talking about that. Not seriously talking about what we have to do. But of course, we have a whole generation now who've come through an educational system with no concept of what rights of the English people are and the British people are when it comes to the Bill of Rights, the Toleration Acts, the principles of law, the Enlightenment, which, of course, your country was a leading light. So all these things, I think, are very important. But it's a question of where to start, especially, of course, if you look at the educational system. Your average school teacher, this is so far above the head of the average school teacher that they wouldn't know where to start to teach a class about the British Constitution, which, of course, if you go back maybe 40 or 50 or 60 years, there was teaching in the classrooms, both state and public schools, on the British Constitution, which people imagine just because it's not written down like the American Constitution that we don't have one. And the level of ignorance of this generation, and I have to say many others, so BBC presenters, journalists, financial journalists in particular, the standard is woefully low. And when I was in office, I was a member of the Economic and Monetary Affairs Committee, and I used to have meetings, obviously, with financial journalists, all sorts of journalists, and I was staggered at how ignorant and ill-informed they were. They really, really are terrible. There are one or two nice guys who read English literature at Cambridge, and there's a few of those kicking around who make very good lunch guests, so I took them to my club, but glaze over if you talk about anything other than a cursory look at Keynesian economies and so on and so forth. And so we can't get out of this hole, and I think maybe, I don't know whether your viewers and mine would agree on this, but there's certain feeling now, it has to get much worse before it gets better. And we saw this in the 1970s. We had to almost break down before things were put right again in the 80s with a real Conservative government. Warts and all, wasn't perfect. And I'm not pretending it was perfect, because it jolly well wasn't, but at least we got back on track in the 1980s and wobbled back off the track, of course, with people like John Major. I mean, really, the classic, isn't it? The one who ran away from a circus to join a bank. I mean, dear. Absolutely fascinating.
And we won't mention Edwina Currie, because some of our viewers may be eating. We won't talk about John Major's tryst with Edwina Currie. Seemingly, he liked his back to the taps, Godfrey.
Well, I always say I'm very, very old-fashioned in this kind of thing. If you cheat on your own family, if you cheat on your wife, you're going to cheat on the nation, aren't you?
Yeah. Exactly.
And now, it's all right if you're French, because you expect a Frenchman to do that kind of thing. But it's a sort of thing a proper chap doesn't really do. And if he does do it, he's a bit more discreet. So I think this is the trouble with... I did an interview with in Inverness, of all places. I was on holiday in the Isle of Skye, and I raced across to Inverness to do an interview with Edwina Currie, who was desperately keen to join the euro, and they introduced her to sort of an economic expert, which I said, just a minute, no, you've got that mixed up. I'm an economic expert. She is a bimbo.
She's the adulterer.
Yes.
Yeah.
Jezebel, stone her.
There's so much in what you just said, actually, and let me try and unpack little bits and pieces, because I want to take you to the rise of the right-wing parties in Europe compared to what we see in this country, where it seems to be, if we're looking at masochists and sadists, it seems to be those that enjoy a damn good whipping, rather than being whipped, make up the main body of this country. If we see Keir Starmer be appointed the World Economic Forum puppet, the man who enjoys Davos, thinks he can get more done than Davos, than Westminster behind me. But is it fair to say that there may be intellectual and hierarchical differences in that Europe, the youth in Europe, are drifting more towards right-wing patriotism, nationalism? They've had decades of this socialist agenda with the LGBT, the net zero trash that comes through, mass unlimited immigration, all these equality and diversity. In this country, we have a hierarchy and an establishment that gave birth to communism. In Bloomsbury in London, many people still are uneducated enough to know that Lenin and Stalin actually spent time in London before they took these ideologies across to the Soviet Union. So do we still have a sort of intellectual deficit between in the United Kingdom and the rest of Europe?
Well, that's a very interesting question. It's difficult to know whether it's intellectual or whether it's tribal or quite what's going on. But I don't think you can take the tribe out of people. It seems that we have consistently had elected since the 1980s people who actually don't like this country. They don't like this country. Sunak isn't even of this country. So it's all very difficult. And Keir Starmer, of course, is a traditional hater of this country. Tony Blair was a typical hater of our tradition and our institutions, which didn't stop him accepting the Knight of the Garter, of course, and wearing a fluffy hat, because he is an arch criminal. But this is a sort of problem. But how do you take out the tribal, as it were. If you go to a football match, and football is a very popular sport. It's not my game. I'm an oval ball man. But if you go football, every nation in Europe will cheer madly for their side if they're playing in the European Cup, in the national, or wherever it is, wherever their side is playing. It doesn't matter whether it's Croatia, France, Italy. They will all cheer maniacally for their own country. That's natural. That's how it is. You stick to your tribe, you support your tribe. It means the captain of your side, whether it's a football side, whatever it is, you have to be in favour of that side winning, don't you? If you're going to trot out with your 11 chaps or 10 chaps behind you as captain of your soccer team, your national, you want to win. Now, we always seem to find prime ministers and senior politicians in this country who actually don't want to win. They trot out of the pitch wanting us to lose. And of course, when they went in to negotiate for the European Union, they went into at the beginning, and then we came out and we wanted to negotiate after that. The civil service now hate this country, every man jack of them. And so consequently, they want us to lose, they want us to fail, they want Brexit to fail, they want us to fail as a nation, so they can install their Soviet-style, socialist-style, or what is actually quite fascinating is if you look, and there's, again, on my website, you'll find an article on fascism. What we actually have in the European Union, and indeed I would say this country, is fascism. And I don't use that in the pejorative sense as a silly, national union of students shouting out, that is fascism, bullshit. It is a political theory. And it's popular in Europe, very popular in Italy before the war. National Socialism was popular in Germany. And it doesn't matter what anybody likes to think or say. You've only got to look at the film clips from the 20s and the 30s. All those people cheering away, which you couldn't find in 1945. They'd all magically disappeared. Yeah. But you can't get rid of those people. They believe, and what is fascism in a nutshell? It's the close cooperation between the political, banking, and corporate class. It's mercantilism. Many, many undergraduates today imagine that we have capitalism, which of course we don't. We have mercantilism, which is what it was called. Now sometimes it's called crony capitalism, but it's not capitalism. And if you want to look up what capitalism really is from a practical example, look at post-war Hong Kong under John Cooperthwaite. That was laissez-faire capitalism. And by God, did that work. What we have now is corporatism, if you want to call it that, or mercantilism, which, of course, it doesn't work. And then your gap between the rich and the poor grows bigger and bigger. You're then, as Colonel McGregor always says, your government is run by sponsors, people or contributors to your campaign funds, and your lobbyists. And there are 10,000 lobbyists in Brussels. So big people like BP or Kellogg's or whomever it might be, or Sainsbury's, they get their way at the expense of the corner shop or the small business. That is quite deliberate. That is not an accident. A lot of people think that's an accident. The whole point of over-regulation is to suit the big corporations and to drive the little man out. That's the game. And if you want to look at that, certainly your animal lovers on your show will know what happened when all the vets merged. They got rid of all the little vets, all the little veterinary practices, who are then amalgamated into big corporations, or fairly big corporations. But now you can't find a vocational vet. You might be lucky, you might just find one or two, but generally speaking, you forget all creatures great and small. The first thing that these people want to know is how they're going to get their fee. Is your horse insured? Is your dog insured? And when my wife gave a lecture, she's an equine physiotherapist, even 15 years ago, maybe even longer, she gave an interview to the veterinary college at Cambridge, the veterinary school at Cambridge University, on equine physiotherapy. And it came to question time. These were third-year undergraduates, third or fourth-year veterinary undergraduates. The first question that came was, how does the fee structure work? What a degree of cynicism from a girl or boy of 21 or 22, 23 years old who's gone into veterinary science. How does the fee structure work? And that's the kind of vet you're getting these days. Good old-fashioned vets have all gone now. They're all after the fees. And that's a great shame. That's a great shame. But it's all part of big is beautiful all the time.
Sure, and all you mentioned Tony Blair, and all roads seem to lead to Tony Blair. You're talking about the type of character of Prime Minister and leadership that we've had. I could argue that Ted Heath was actually worse, odious creature who dragged us in to the European Union, or the common market as it was back then, on the promise that this would just be a trade alliance. I mean, what are your views on Heath?
Well, I could sum it up quite shortly. I would dig him up and put his head on a spike on London Bridge. And I am not bloody joking. The most odious, disgusting man that has been in politics, possibly, I don't know, in our history, along with Tony Blair, probably. He put, and I'm speaking to you, as you know, from Yorkshire, he put Yorkshire villages in Lancashire because he wanted to tidy up the borders for his regionalisation under a lot of your viewers won't understand the enormity of that, the enormity of putting an ancient Yorkshire village in Lancashire and vice versa. That is just disgusting. Yeah. But he was another guy that hated us. He hated our institutions. He hated everything. I don't know what the matter with Heath was. I think he wanted to be born a Frenchman. I mean, dear, oh dear, who on earth would choose to be French over English or Scots?
Absolutely, but there's so much written about him, and he's allegedly seriously compromised over his personal life. Obviously, he never married, he never had children, and we cannot add two and two together, Godfrey, and make anything of that. But he seemed to be, I see you smiling, and for good reason, he seemed to be heavily and seriously compromised. But you could argue, perhaps with the exception of Mrs. Thatcher, they're all people who would have been someone's fag at Eton. They're all people who are, the opposite of stoic. They've no backbone, they've no leadership qualities, they're followers, they're order takers, not order givers. Is that fair?
Well, yes, I think that's probably it. That's probably true. But I think the trouble is that you find in politics, it's the sort of person that's attracted to politics is Bossy Boots, who was probably the milk monitor. At school in the old days, that dates me, doesn't it? The milk monitor. These people weren't, and here's an interesting thing. You will never see a leading politician photographed in a sporting team. They don't do team. They may play tennis, they may play golf, they might do this, but not a team. You won't ever find a picture of a rugby 15 with a politician in it because they don't do team. And getting back to sport, if you may call it such, let's look at ocean racing. Ocean racing is the most expensive sport in the world, bar none. By miles, not by just a bit, by an extremely long way. How did a son of a grocer get Morning Cloud and become an ocean racer, which indeed Edward VII was an ocean racer, and he need banking money and things to actually support. Even Edward VII wasn't rich enough to do ocean racing without help from the private sector, and Edward Heath. Now, of course, the theory is, or the hypothesis is, the only people that could have done that and done it discreetly would have been the Germans, the German government, to sponsor his ocean racing in a very discreet and very careful way. But what is interesting here, coming back to political and financial journalism, wouldn't you think, I mean, if he was on your show, Mark, if he was on your show, the first thing you'd have asked Edward Heath, how do you afford all this ocean yacht racing? Well, I can't afford my golf club fees. How do you manage all this? And nobody ever asked him that. Now, shouldn't that be the first question you ask? Where did he get all his money? Why is Tony Blair now one of the richest men in the world? Well, who again was, I think I'm right in saying, born in relatively humble circumstances. Where did all that money come from if it wasn't George Soros? And what did he do with George Soros? What does he do with Bill Gates? These billionaires, what are you giving? What happened to George Osborne, who was Chancellor of the Exchequer, when suddenly my old company, well, I actually worked for Mercury Asset Management, which then became Merrill Lynch when Merrill Lynch bought it, which now is BlackRock. What is George Osborne doing for his £600,000 a year salary for turning up maybe once a week? What favours were granted to BlackRock or Merrill Lynch when he was in office, when it comes to financial transaction tax, when it comes to this, what not in a week. And bear in mind, if you're dealing in futures, I speak as a fund manager of yesteryear, a nod or a wink can give you, let's say, the stock price of BlackRock was going to fall 5% if a financial transaction tax was imposed. Let's just say, not an unreasonable supposition.
Well,
he speaks for an hour and a quarter, the Chancellor maybe, or something like it. What happens if over a discreet lunch he says to Larry Fink, or whoever the boss man is, if I take a sip of water before I start speaking, it means there'll be no financial transaction tax. Then it gives them time to go and buy huge put options on BlackRock stock. And that means that they can make, of those put options, probably £750 million. So paying George Osborne £500,000 a year is cheap at the bloody price. But nobody, financial journalists, asked the question, George, what do you do? Why would they give you that? And of course, but if we don't, but then is Laura Cheeseburger at the BBC, who's on 300 grand a year, going to rock the boat by asking those sort of questions? Or Andrew Neil? Andrew Neil, there's an interesting character. There's an interesting, very, very, very rich man. Very rich man. Where's his money? Onshore? Offshore? Oh, come on, everybody, let's get real.
Well, so much fantastic information there, an explosion, a plethora of facts. But if we could resurrect Ted Heath by some sort of AI technology and bring him back, the first question I would ask him is, where are the bodies? All those visits that you made to Hout to Graw guest house and all those trips of children no one ever heard again, where the hell are they? I don't really want to go down that rabbit hole today, but maybe another time. But I'm sure you know exactly what I'm talking about, Godfrey.
You want to get perhaps Sonia Poulton on your program?
Yeah.
She. I don't know anybody who's dug deeper on this particular subject than her.
Yeah.
So yeah, fascinating. I've been on her show a few times, and I speak to her privately sometimes. And oh boy, does she know some stuff? And she's, I would argue, one of the only serious investigative journalists in the country. Well, you might argue that Julian Assange, there could be two, Julian Assange and Sonia Poulton, you know.
Well, when it gets real, you have to look at these places like guest houses. There's the infamous Elm Street guest house in London. There's the Kincora Boys Home that's got a book list, a guest book list of the who's who of the aristocracy politically and even in the royal family. Talking about Mountbatten and all these things. But again, this is probably a rabbit hole that you and I won't wander down today, dear friend. But can I get you to, we're talking about corruption. We're talking about money, billions going into grubby little sweaty hands. Now, this is a segue onto Mr. Zelensky over in Ukraine. You've made some interesting comments on your fantastic Twitter page saying that if I'm, correct me if I'm wrong, but Ukraine is a shithole and Zelensky is corrupt. Do you care to expand on this, please, Godfrey?
Well, I wrote an article in 2016, and again, boring, it's on my website, to just explain what a shithole the Ukraine is and how corrupt it is. And of course, I think a few years following that, actually 5 years following that, The Guardian actually ran a really big editorial on what a shithole the place was. Now, of course, they can do no wrong. The Guardian thinks that Ukraine is wonderful. But it really is, corruption is a way of life. It's like parts of Africa. That's what they do. You know, that's what they do. And of course, here's a fascinating thing, isn't it? We all know this is why I refer to myself as a conspiracy analyst, not theorist. I'm an analyst for the simple reason we all know that he's bought his mother, I think it's on Lake Como, a palace virtually on Lake Como. We know he's got properties in the United States, Greece and elsewhere, massive properties. And so when he does actually get kicked out or indeed not strung up by his own people in much the same way as Mussolini was, that's where he will retire to. So we all know he's a corrupt bastard. We also know that the people who sponsor him, like Boris Johnson, the Washington neocons, are not interested in the casualties. They're not interested. I mean, the Swiss peace conference was ridiculous, but the Russians weren't there. How can you have a peace conference when one of the main belligerents is not there? So the whole thing's a joke. But of course, we have been drip-fed propaganda by the press again, and we've covered this before, Mark. We do not have an independent press anymore. We don't have a free press. And if you take free press out of a society, particularly a society like ours, you've taken away one of the main pillars of freedom. We have the principles of English law, but the free press is part of it. And of course, you can go back over time. It's not just in this country. Pamphleteers were banned, in the 1700s in this country and all the rest of it. This isn't new. So you have all these problems about when you get rid of a free press. And of course, Abraham Lincoln, isn't he wonderful? Not. Not many of the northern states and northern newspapers were not in favor of the North invading the South. It wasn't a civil war, incidentally. It's a popular misunderstanding. The North fought the South, and it was about tariffs, not slavery. But we won't go down to another rabbit hole.
Yes.
But the first thing that Abraham Lincoln did was to lock up all the editors of the newspapers and suspend habeas corpus. Dissent is not allowed. And what is the first thing, of course, that said when von der Lande, I can never pronounce the name, von der whatever stupid name is, she came back from Davos and said, what we've got to really crush is misinformation. What she actually meant, of course, that if it's got to be what we say it is. The truth is what we say it is in Davos. And of course, who then endorsed that? Sir Keir Starmer. And I would say, people say, oh, yes, are we going to get Keir Starmer and all the rest of it? Oh, come on, everybody. Sunak is exactly the same. There's no difference. You couldn't put a cigarette paper in between Sunak and Keir Starmer. They are the same person. They're the same person. And they're all, Sunak, ex-Goldman Sachs, don't need, that's all you need to say. Ex-Goldman Sachs is all you need to say. These people are appalling, and they're not called out by a free press, because a free press isn't a free press, and they're part of it. But if you work basically for a state-sponsored organisation like the BBC, and you're on £300,000 a year, and you have never asked a reasonable appetite question in your entire bleeding career, Laura Cheeseburger, take the money. Take the money, sell a few books, do a bit of this, bit of that, don't rock the boat. I have to say, if somebody gave me that kind of money, I might be a bit of a less of a boat rocker myself. I don't know. I'm too old now, I wouldn't know how to spend it. I'd spend it up at the rugby club.
Yeah, you'd spend it down at the bar in a few months, and you'd go down to the stock market, and you'd probably make a killing. But look, you're absolutely right. We have a traitor class in this country, as we label them. They're right through every single establishment in this country, in the UK, and throughout the Western world. Nowhere probably more clearer than in America right now, where you see Joe Biden, Godfrey. The man should be in a home. He should be sitting on a commode all day. He's dribbling and drooling, but it's beyond farce. But then there are none so blind as those who will not see, as you and I have both discussed on many, many occasions. And it's interesting what you said about the press. Elon Musk must be seen as a little bit of a cautious hero in this respect, because the platform that this will be going out on, and the majority of our interviews all go out on, and they do very well, is on X, Twitter, formerly Twitter. In Australia, the hapless globalist Prime Minister Albanese wanted to put Elon Musk in jail.
Really, I don't know what to say. What can you say when we have leaders of the supposedly free democracies, which is nonsense, people in jail for having an alternative opinion, and then bad-mouthing President Putin at the election, that it wasn't a real election, well, what about Biden? What about Biden's election? That was pretty stinky poo, wasn't it? So absolutely. The whole thing is hopeless. The whole thing has collapsed. Sometimes I get a bit cross though. People say, oh, Biden's too old and he's, No, Biden has dementia.
Sure.
All right? I'm old. I'm not as old as Biden. I'm 75. I'd make a bloody excellent president of the United States, I can assure you, or prime minister of this country. And I'm 75. age has got nothing to do with it.
Yeah.
I mean, Keir Starmer, I know what Keir Starmer is and all these people, but I mean, they're all sort of around about 40 or something, aren't they? Or 45.
He's actually mid-60s. I think Starmer's in his mid-60s. Yeah.
But I mean, it's got age has got nothing to do with it.
Exactly.
It's who you are, what you believe, what's your ethos. I would love to see somebody patriotic in number 10 Downing Street for the first time since the 1980s.
Yeah, absolutely. And the proposition of, there was a peace plan put together by Vladimir Putin and his team, and it was just rejected completely out of hand. And these are the kind of things that we see. The media backs it up, and it is such an important pillar. But just to get your views and rounding up the last couple of questions, if we can, is that Donald Trump is surging in the polls. There's something like 400 million has been put into the coffers for his campaign. There's definitely a softening up from the right in the European electorate to Donald Trump. And in this country, he's very, very popular with the likes of the Reform Party voters on the centre right. Do you think he will get a fair run now that there is such a groundswell of support for him in the US and abroad?
It's difficult. Some of the same problems they have in America as we have here. It's difficult for a president or a prime minister of this country to fight deep state without some really radical change. And I mean radical. I mean huge. He needs to disestablish the FBI. He needs to disestablish the CIA. He needs to disestablish the Fed. He's not going to do any of these things. He's not going to do them. The only way you can save America is by disestablishing those things. And in this country, the only way you can do it is by disestablishing the welfare state, disestablishing the civil service, and bringing in a system where if you have a government, let's say a libertarian government, which I would want, I would have to bring in my own civil servants. And you've only got to know that by looking at the old clips of Yes Minister.
Yeah.
You can't fight the blob. You can't fight the blob. I would want to go through every single in this country, every single charity which was politicized, all of them except one down in Wakefield, which looks after abandoned greyhounds. They are all politicized, no more so than the RNLI, which used to be squeaky clean, which is now a taxi service for illegals. But if you look at the small print, and again, it's worth visiting David Starkid's view, in order to have charitable status in the small print, you have to be bang on politically correct. And I suspect if the RNLI said, no, we're not collecting any money, or it's suffering fundraising and our men don't like doing it and all the rest of it, they would probably have their charitable status withdrawn. It doesn't help that we have a right on politically correct royal family now. If it was royal, if I was the king, I don't know who the patron is now, but it doesn't matter. I would say, I am withdrawing your royalty. It's no longer the Royal National Lifeboat, it's the Lifeboat Institution, because you're actually degrading a country of which I'm the sovereign. But who's going to do all this? So I don't think, and the other thing with Trump is he doesn't understand fundamental economics either, I have to say. I like Trump winning because it annoys all the people that we both hate. And the annoyance factor is great. Yes. But really, if you think about these things, he said he's going to punish any countries which pursue the de-dollarization program. If you think it through, you couldn't think of a more stupid comment, could you? The reason that de-dollarization is happening in China and Russia is because and Venezuela and places, because you can have your assets confiscated if you don't agree politically with the United States. And then Trump comes out and says, if you disagree politically with the United States, we're going to seize your assets. What does he think that's going to do to the de-dollarization program? It's going to speed it up, isn't it? How could it not speed it up?
Absolutely. Well, you're a financial expert as well, and you've got an amazing website that we follow, and anybody looking to get into investment should certainly have a look at it. As far as buying precious metals is concerned, buying gold, and we've got a little guest appearance there by...
Hello, everybody. Now, bugger off.
If only you could do that with our traitor class as well. I certainly would... I wouldn't tickle them under the chin. But look, you leave this excellent, but people looking to come out the banking system, right? People, it's a busted flush, the fiat currency, fractional reserve banking, yada, yada. You've gone on about it for such a long time. You've raised the flag. You've warned people off. More and more are looking to buy gold as you see the Chinese, the Arab states, they're all getting in. They're piling into this because it looks like it's a busted flush. Do you see when people have bought their gold, do you see them being able to access this? Say, for example, if it's in a safety deposit box, there'll be regulations around this. Do you see them getting really dirty with people and making it difficult for them to access their money, gold?
That's a very good question. What one has to take is the first premise: if the government is determined to seize your assets, they can and they will. Now, there's no counterparty risk if you put your gold, as I have, in a safe deposit box. Not a bank. Keep clear of banks which are 20 or 30% owned by the state anyway. Nobody knows what's in your safe deposit box. They can't know. You hire the box. You have the key. It could be papers. It could be documents. It could be a pearl necklace. It could be anything. So nobody actually knows what you have in your safe deposit box. All you can do when you have governments, the sort of governments that we have now, is do your best to get out of the casino. What you mustn't have is a counterparty risk of any note. So you don't want to believe anybody. Let's say you buy gold and your bullion dealer keeps it for you insured in a safe deposit box. That's okay, because they're not stupid. They won't give it to a bank. They will have it, and it will be insured, and it will be audited. And this is what they do. And I keep some of my gold on that basis too. I keep some of my gold on that basis.
Sure.
I mean, obviously, if you've only got a little bit of gold, if you've only got 20 sovereigns or something, you can stick it in the tea caddy. Nobody's going to find it. But I think if you make it part of your portfolio. Now, here's an interesting thing. Governments don't like you buying gold because it takes you out of their power. They can't. They haven't got digital currency or their own currency, which is credit. Paper currency is credit. They can't control you, and that's why banks, central banks, international central banks, with the exception of the Fed, are holding and adding all the time to their gold holdings. Interestingly enough, hardly anybody in this country or even America hold gold in their private portfolios. It's about 0.5% on average. In fact, I think it's rather less. Now, years ago, it would be 5% or 6% gold in specie. Now, you try and do that in your pension fund, and this is something I'm looking into. Your pension fund, we now know that gold in specie is a tier 1 reserve along with American dollar T-bills. They're the only two tier 1 reserve assets that the Bank of International Settlements will let you have. You try and buy gold in specie in your self-administered pension fund. Almost impossible. Almost impossible. So the establishment, which controlled the licensing of pensioner trustees, don't like it. So you have a tier 1 reserve asset that you can't keep in your pension. And where would you want a tier 1 reserve asset? In your pension. Because it's long-term and it's your retirement fund, but you can't do it. And that's one of the problems on which I'm working. But certainly my recommendation, and I now have the biggest website in the country on gold. Interviews with people like Alistair MacLeod, interviews with Grass, and all sorts of very top people, lots of graphs, lots of color pictures, and there's a list of people that I've done some due diligence on, bullion dealers who I trust, but do your own. Everybody must do their own due diligence. Don't take anybody's word for it. Don't take my word for it. Drill down and find out who you want to do business with. Which bullion dealer do you want to do business with? And get your money out of the casino. Get your money out of the grasp of politicians and bankers. I can assure you that the people like Jamie Dimon will have gold a huge portion of his personal portfolio in gold, and nobody will ever know where it is because he's a master criminal.
100% agree with all those comments. And it's great that you touched on the tiny fraction, the 0.5% that British investors will have on their portfolio compared to those in China, India, the Middle East, where it's more like 40%, Godfrey, that they've invested in.
Exactly. The interesting thing, Mark, is the savings ratio in China for the Chinese population is 35%. North America and Britain, it's paycheck to paycheck. We don't save. I'm talking about savings portfolios. As a nation, we don't save money. Americans don't save money because the government takes so much in tax, there's nothing left over. Well, you know, when you've paid your rates, your income tax, your national insurance, the tax on booze, which in my case is enormous, the tax and when you put petrol in your car, and all these things, they don't leave you any money to save. So a lot of people get onto my website and say, it's really interesting, but I can't afford money. I don't have any money. Well, of course, the good news about not having any money is that the government can't nick it. So my subscribers to my gold page have money so they can stop the government nicking it, almost stop the government nicking it. But as I say, same with Bitcoin. And Bitcoiners are totally evangelical. Bitcoiners come on to me sometimes, and I do interview with Bitcoiners, and they're great, but they're very evangelical. They actually think Bitcoin cannot be stolen by the government. They actually believe that they can't be stolen by the government. And of course, say, well, I've got my own personal password and it's my own personal wallet. How can they steal it? Julian Assange, solitary confinement in Belmarsh if they think you've got it, and you can't get out until you give them the code. Easy peasy, isn't it?
Well, it's about the best. You're absolutely right, but it's about the best match fit. There is no perfect answer to it. But for example, if somebody's got a spare £100,000 lying around, putting it into a bank would be insanity, especially when you look at the 114 countries currently either involved in central digital banking or on the way to central digital banking. And as you say, apart from people get in touch with us as well, Bitcoiners, and they are zealots, like the net zero zealots. They can't see any wrong or any flaws. Very dangerous, stupid people indeed, as I'm sure you would call them, some. But they talk about like Monero. We have a great follower. He follows you as well. He talks about Monero and how this is probably ring-fenced more than things like Bitcoin. Have you heard of the Monero?
I haven't, no.
No. I'll leave some links to other people. I don't want to take you down that rabbit hole, but it seems to be the most secure. But even just buying gold, going back just a tiny bit, on gold and buying gold, was it not recently that we found out that Nationwide and several other banks are making it damn near impossible for anybody to buy gold from their accounts to the bullion dealers?
I did a recording on this, Mark. Yes. Thank you for raising that point. And I warn everybody, if you have £50,000 in Nationwide or something like that, and you want to transfer it to a bullion dealer and take delivery of your sovereigns, and incidentally, just quickly, sovereigns only, please, or Britannias, or half sovereigns are best, nothing else. Don't buy anything else. All right, that's what you've got to do. So you have this interesting system. They simply will not release the money. I've had Lloyd's, the recent one, Lloyd's, he went into the Lloyd's Bank. He wanted to buy £200,000 worth of, he got in touch with me. I don't know who buys gold on my website. I haven't a clue and I don't want to know. But he got in touch with me saying, I wanted to transfer £200,000 for Lloyd's Bank, and they simply wouldn't let me do it. Now, that's part of a legal wrangle that's going on at the moment. But of course, again, I think I mentioned this on your program before, Mark, and it's something that you know, but it's worth reminding both our audiences of. The Bank Charter Act of 1845, I think it was, or something like that. When you give your money to a bank, it becomes the bank's money, and they give you an account or a chit or a receipt. If it were, that money belongs to the bank. It no longer belongs to you. So you have counter risk. You have counter risk. So if they say we're not actually going to check, we're not going to transfer it, very difficult to do very much about it because it's not your money. So if I would say, if you are in Nationwide, certainly, if you're in Nationwide, take your money out of Nationwide and transfer it to another bank. I haven't heard anything bad about Halifax, for example, but I mean, but make sure that you transfer it somewhere which is not a problem. And Nationwide are particularly hostile. And of course, you ask yourself, why don't they want to let big sums go from their deposit? Because they're broke, aren't they? They're broke. Fractional reserve banking. They don't really have it.
Godfrey, I don't know if you've got this, or it would be a fantastic idea if someone could compile a list of banks that we know of as a group that work together, your followers, our followers, our audience out there. If we could put a group together of bullion-friendly purchasing banks, because this is happening in other banks. It's actually happening in the Bank of Scotland as well. They're putting the kibosh on people, and what they use is it's fraud. Oh, you could be linked up to a chain where the money could have come from drug dealers in Bogota. I mean, this bullshit. Any excuse. So is that possible that we could compile a list of...
I think I've probably already got the data to do it. What I'll do is I've got some colleagues who help me on the website and come on and all the rest of it. I'll get the information together. But if you are an ordinary Joe, and I don't mean that in a patronizing way, you could be a surgeon, you could be a GP, you could be a barrister, you could be any number of people, professional men or artisans, wealthy artisans, of whom there are now a number. You say, I've been listening to Godfrey, and I've been listening to this, and I've been listening to that, and I've read the website. I think I want my money out of this damn bank because you're insolvent. You are insolvent. If they start talking about fraud, and one occasion, they said, we might, if you insist upon this, we might have to phone the police. We might have to bring the police in. This is to a guy who's going, by God, what's all this about? And the other thing is, well, the reason I've gone further down this in the past is because it doesn't necessarily follow by bank. It can follow in regions. So you might find Lloyds Bank in that region, the Eastern region, or the North London region, or whatever it happens to be. They take that view, but Lloyds Bank in somewhere else don't necessarily take that view. But you're right, it's all hidden behind regulation. And one bank said to this guy, said, "Oh well, we have to do this for regulatory systems, blah 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 blah." And he said, "Well, there's not much I can do." No, they're regulations. They're regulations. Go to a bank which don't do that. Transfer your money. But certainly.
I agree. Sorry to interrupt you, but we've heard of people who are selling up on their property portfolios because with an incoming Keir Starmer and Labour government, they don't feel very confident about interest rates or inflation. As I'm sure you'll agree right now, that's very volatile with incoming Starmer, especially with their spending program or spending plans. But what they're looking to do, Godfrey, is sell up the portfolio, move it into brand new accounts, and buy bullion directly from the funds. So, and they have a lawyer overseeing this, or someone who's aware of the FCA diktats. This is the stage it's getting to now, isn't it?
Oh, indeed it is. And believe me, with some colleagues, I'm working very strongly on that. And what we're also doing is we are preempting it. So if somebody comes on to any of the bullion dealers that I've recommended, and I say, they advertise on my website, and holistically, but that's it. They advertise. I need the advertising to pay for my techie people and stuff like that. But it's not for profit. It's not profit making. It's not a profit making thing.
No.
It's just so that I can make it work. And it's not just gold, of course. It's health and it's other matters. But this is a kind of thing that we're doing. And so we try and preempt, or these people try and preempt. When somebody comes on and has a chat with one of the dealers at the bullion, and they say, be aware, with whom do you bank? And if they say Nationwide, they say, they do not like you taking money to buy bullion. And if the guy is pre-warned, he then gets in a strop and says, this is my money, the bastards. And he goes in that frame of mind, and he's not like a rabbit in the headlights. So it's not preempted. He's like a rabbit in the headlights when he's talked to these gangsters who are trying to steal his money. And that's what they are. Bankers are gangsters. We all know that. I used to work for one. So I used to say when I was campaigning, Mark, vote for me, I'm less of a scoundrel than the other bastards.
Well, listen, after some of your fantastic speeches, which are still on YouTube, where you put these cretins from Brussels, these French and Italians, Germans, whoever they were, you put them to the sword. And what you did to Michael Crick alone, we've discussed this every time you come on, because it's one of the most glorious moments in political history, not just in this country, but in any country. And to turn the tables on that tiny man who wants more migrants, he wants to see us go back into the EU. Oh, it's perfect. You must look back on that fondly, Godfrey.
I couldn't, in Yorkshire, which of course I represented, as you know, I couldn't buy a drink for months. Every pub I went into, people were complete strangers coming up. I've got to buy you a pint. I've got to buy it. That was just hilarious. I said, thank you very much.
Look, fantastic times. Look, a final point to you, because you've been very generous with your time indeed, sir. But on the back of those of us that have grave concerns over a banking collapse, an oncoming, on the back of that is the central banking digital currency, social credit scoring, which looks likely that it will come in. They're doing it, as I mentioned, 114 countries are doing it. The Australians are looking at rolling it out. We're looking at rolling it out. We've got a ministry dedicated for doing this, and the civil service are champing at the bit to get this up and running. But looking at an oncoming pandemic, we've spoken to people. Andrew Bridgen we had on the show. Andrew reckons once the World Health Organization Pandemic Preparedness Treaty is, that's what it's called this week, once that's ratified, once that's passed, there will be another pandemic. They will roll the dice again. What are your thoughts on this, and when do you think it will happen, if at all?
They're certainly going to try. That there's no doubt. They've said so. Again, I'm an analyst, not a theorist. They have said there is going to be another pandemic. Bill Gates was caught smirking as he said it. He knows because he's going to create it. But it'll be probably another fake pandemic, as the last one was. And if you could look around, you can't find any dead. And pandemics, a lot of dead pile up in the street. We haven't had either. So now here's the thing. My wife is a medic, is still not unassociated with the medical world in various ways, and I won't bore you with the details. But the NHS were advertising on Facebook to come and have your COVID booster. All right, at the moment, they're actually doing that at the moment. She actually complained to Facebook because she was horrified and offended by it, and we all need to be offended occasionally, don't we? Because that's the way it was. And she got quite a fair bit of traction for somebody without a very big social footprint on that basis. 100% of people said never again, never again. And the people that have suffered, and I'd be interested to take Andrew's view on this, a number of people, thousands of people who did have cardiac problems, blood clots, health problems, turbo cancers, all of these people, a huge number of these people still haven't joined the dots, Mark. They still haven't associated it with the jab. There's a young, fit young man here at our local butcher shop, really nice guy, and he's now got diabetes 1, just out of the blue. And there's this happening all the time. And so I would say 80% of the people go with the flow. That's something we know. That's just analysis of the human condition. Yeah. I think if they try and give us more jabs and these kind of things, I think the pushback will be much greater. I think it will probably go to 30%. I think we'll only persuade 70% of the gullible. There will always be the gullible and the stupid with us. They're normally, and I've said this before in your show, they will normally be middle class, English middle class. There is no genre more stupid than the English middle class. I don't think you'll put it across the artisan class again, or so on and so forth. So how many people would take the jab? How are they going to enforce it other than policemen having to knock on the door and drag you off and force you to have it? And of course, the other thing, this isn't easy for people to do. I have removed myself from the National Health. I went down, and my doctor, my GP, was a friend of mine, personal friend of mine, a good man, who's retiring now anyway. I've taken all the files back. I've taken everything back. I'm not on their computer. So when the government say you've got the World Health Organization, which will tell Starmer, and Starmer will immediately embrace it, you've got to have your jab for the latest bird flu or thing. And this is going to happen. This will happen. The game is that they simply can't find you. They can't find you because they will say to the regional health center, they will say, has anybody refused to have the bird flu jab? But if you're not on the computer, they can't say yay or nay. But the only way you can do that is to get out of the system and have a private system, go to a private GP whose practice has nothing to do with the state. Your local GP is part of the state apparatus. Your GP, in the main, is also gullible and stupid or dishonest. Dr. Cartland, I don't know whether you've had Dr. Cartland on your show, but he's another interesting bloke that would be good to have on your show. So he's like, so this is what we're doing. How they're going to get away with it again, especially, well, of course, we've got to hope that Andrew Bridgen gets re-elected.
Yes, 100%. Yeah, sorry.
And of course, Nigel got into bed with Big Pharma and Tony Blair on this very subject. And a piece of political advice, if I may be so impertinent to give it to Nigel, is admit you made a bloody mistake. You dropped a huge clanger. Do a, sackcloth and ashes. Sackcloth and ashes, please, Nigel. Oh God, didn't I get that wrong? I will not make that mistake again. There we go. Fair enough, you weren't the only one. Don't try and brush it under the carpet. Trump is trying to brush it under the carpet. That's a mistake. That's a mistake. Come up with it. Make an apology. I dropped a bollock. There we are.
Yeah. Although you're absolutely right, Donald Trump, those of us that would rather have him than Joe Biden or the Democrats, going back to that, he did recommend hydrochloroquine. He did recommend the other medications out there, ivermectin, for example, which was inexplicably banned. After 30, 40 years of use, they cherry-picked one report that was used in a hospice, Godfrey, and people that only had months to live. And they said, oh, look, oh dear, these people are dying. But you're 100% right where you say, that's why I connected up the banks, where to take your money, come off grid. I didn't know that you'd decoupled yourself, sir. Very wise, from the NHS, and you just get private healthcare provision. People are moving overseas or traveling overseas for their treatment now, Godfrey, because it's better. It's a more sensible idea. That's where we're going with this.
You're not giving up much getting out there now. Don't forget, incidentally, for your listeners, your viewers here, if you get run over by a car, you'll still be treated.
Yeah.
You'll still be taken to hospital in an ambulance. You'll be dead by the time you arrive, of course, because they've got electric ambulances. But anyway, when you actually get there and they sort you out, you're still. And my wife had a very bad fall from a horse last year. Very bad, very serious, blue lighted, and all the rest of it. No problem at all with first-class treatment that she got from a top surgeon in Hull Royal.
Yeah,
a top surgeon. So all that's fine. So don't have to worry. What you will have to do is put your hand in your pocket for your prescriptions and put your hand in your pocket for an appointment with a GP.
Yeah, 100% correct. That's where all this is going. It's the decoupling exercise, taking yourself away from the controllers that we have, whether it be the financial regulators, the NHS, or anybody that can have an influence over your sovereignty, your bodily autonomy,
exactly.
Your national
sovereignty. You have to get the state out of your life. You must get the state, and that means the national health.
Yeah.
Everybody who's involved with the state. Shut up. And that is tea time. It's tea time.
Yes. It's tea time. Well, look, everything you said, going back to the very beginning, we're sure Lord Salisbury, if he's up there looking at us, he would have blessed and everything that you had said. But look, unless there's anything less that you'd like to add to our viewers and listeners, just as a very quick, positive glimmer of light in the mist of battle.
Everything I've got is on my website, whether it's health, whether it's gold, whatever it is, it's all there. And it's not just me. There's lots of other top people who've come onto the channel and been interviewed, and it's all there. And I will respond to any sensible questions. I'll get to them. I will respond. But having said that, if you drill down, you will find the answers there. There's Q&A. There's all sorts of stuff. So I'm now just going to say I'm going to shoot the dogs. You're being shot.
Well, very leftists or Wild Guardian readers are watching this. Godfrey's joking, ladies and gents, or whatever you are. Godfrey's kidding, boys and girls. But listen, Lord Salisbury is a hero of yours. You are a hero of ours, sir. Take that in the right manner. But listen, Godfrey Bloom, thank you very much for coming back on to Herd Immunity News once again, sir.
Bless you. Thank you for inviting me. I thoroughly enjoyed it, as I always do.
Thank you.